The unexpected encounter. John had always preferred the quiet life, living on the edge of a small human colony on planet Novara. Far from Earth suited him just fine. The colony was peaceful, surrounded by dense forests and endless skies, dotted with stars that felt close enough to touch. John spent his days fixing machines, trading supplies, and enjoying his solitude. He had no family left, no close friends, and that was the way he liked it. But one evening, everything changed. It started with a strange light in the sky. John was out repairing a drone near the forest line when he noticed it. A streak of blue fire cutting through the darkness. It wasn't a shooting star. It was too slow, too deliberate. He watched as the light grew brighter and then disappeared beyond the trees with a deafening crash. The ground trembled beneath his feet. John hesitated. His instincts told him to stay away, to head back to his cabin, and let someone else investigate. But something pulled him toward the crash site, a mix of curiosity and unease he couldn't ignore. Grabbing a flashlight and his old blaster, he made his way into the forest. The trees were tall and dense, their branches twisting together like a maze. As John moved closer, he noticed the smell, burnt metal, and something sharp, almost like ozone. The air felt heavy. When he finally reached the site, his breath caught in his throat. A sleek alien craft lay half buried in the ground, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly light. Smoke rose from its hull, curling into the night sky. The craft was small, barely big enough for 1 or 2 passengers, and it was unlike anything John had ever seen. The edges seemed to shift and shimmer as if it wasn't entirely solid. Before John could take a step closer, a soft groan reached his ears. He froze, his flashlight scanning the area. That's when he saw her. She was slumped against the side of the ship, her figure illuminated by the faint glow of its hull. At first glance, she looked human, a woman with long, silvery hair that seemed to catch the light in strange ways. But as John approached, he noticed the differences. Her skin had an iridescent sheen, like polished metal, and her eyes, when they opened, glowed faintly with a golden light. "Help me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. John hesitated, his grip tightening on the blaster. He didn't know who or what she was, but she didn't look like a threat. She looked hurt. There was a deep gash on her arm, and her breathing was shallow. Against his better judgment, he knelt beside her. "What happened?" he asked, his voice steady but cautious. "They're coming," she whispered, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "They'll kill us both if they find me." John frowned. "Who's coming? What are you talking about?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out, her hand trembling, and grabbed his arm. Her touch was warm, almost too warm, and he felt a strange sensation, like a current running through his body. "You saved me before," she said, her voice barely audible. "Don't you remember?" John pulled back, confused. "I've never met you before." Her eyes fluttered shut, and for a moment, John thought she had passed out. But then a distant sound broke the silence, a low hum, growing louder. It was coming from the sky. John looked up and saw 3 lights approaching fast. They were sharp and cold, unlike the warm glow of the stars. He didn't need to be a genius to figure out they belonged to whoever she was running from. Cursing under his breath, John made a quick decision. He slung the woman's arm over his shoulder and helped her to her feet. She was lighter than he expected, but every step seemed to take effort. Together, they stumbled away from the crash site, deeper into the forest. The hum grew louder, turning into a piercing whine. John glanced back and saw the lights descending, scanning the area where the ship had landed. Whoever they were, they wouldn't take long to find the trail. "Come on," he muttered, more to himself than to her, "just a little further." After what felt like an eternity, they reached his cabin. John shoved the door open and guided her inside, locking it behind them. He set her down on the worn-out couch and quickly checked the window. The lights were still searching the forest, but they were getting closer. "Who are they?" he asked, turning back to her. "And why are they after you?" The woman opened her eyes again, her golden gaze filled with pain and urgency. "They're hunters," she said, "and they won't stop until I'm dead." John frowned, running a hand through his hair. He didn't sign up for this. He was just a mechanic, a nobody living in the middle of nowhere. But something about her desperation, the way she looked at him, made it impossible to walk away. "You're safe here," he said finally. "At least for now." The woman's eyes softened, and for the first time, she smiled faintly. "Thank you," she said. "My name is Lyra." John nodded, unsure what he had just gotten himself into. "I'm John," he said. "Let's hope I don't regret this." Outside, the lights drew closer, and the hum turned into a low, menacing roar. The night was far from over. The hidden past. The cabin was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of machinery coming from Lyra's damaged armor. John paced near the window, his old blaster clutched tightly in his hand. The distant roar of the hunter ships had faded, but he knew it was only a matter of time before they found them. "Who are you?" he asked, breaking the silence. His voice was sharp, demanding. "And don't give me some vague nonsense about hunters. I need the truth." Lyra was sitting on the edge of his battered couch, her glowing eyes half closed. She looked fragile yet otherworldly, like something out of a dream or a nightmare. At his words, her gaze snapped to him, piercing and steady. "You really don't remember, do you?" she said softly. "Remember what?" John shot back. "I've never seen you before tonight." Lyra tilted her head, studying him as if searching for something buried deep inside. Then, with a sigh, she leaned back, her silvery hair falling around her like liquid light. "You saved me once before," she said. "Years ago, on a station near the Gamma periphery. I was trapped, injured. You didn't know who I was, but you risked your life to get me out." John's brow furrowed. "You've got the wrong guy. I don't play hero." Lyra gave him a faint smile. "You didn't then either, but you did it anyway." He opened his mouth to argue, but something about her words made him pause. A strange flicker of memory stirred in the back of his mind. A dim corridor, the smell of smoke, a figure limping beside him. He shook his head, pushing it away. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. "And even if I did, why come back now? Why me?" Lyra's expression grew serious. "Because you're the only one who can help me." Before John could respond, she raised her hand. A small device embedded in her wrist glowed softly, projecting a three-dimensional map into the air. It was a star chart, vast and intricate, with one point highlighted in fiery red. "This," she said, pointing to the red mark, "is the artifact they're after. It's not just a weapon. It's a key to something ancient, something powerful, and it's hidden somewhere out there." John crossed his arms, skeptical. "Let me guess, you think I know where it is?" Lyra nodded. "Not just think. I know." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Lady, I'm a mechanic. I fix drones and patch up old ships. I don't have any ancient keys lying around." "You're more than you realize," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "There's a reason they're after you too." John's stomach turned. He didn't like the way she said that, as if she knew something about him that he didn't. Before he could press her further, a sudden noise outside made them both freeze. A low, mechanical clicking sound echoed through the trees, growing louder with each passing second. John's heart raced. He knew that sound. It was the hunters, alien drones designed for one purpose: to track and kill. "They found us," Lyra whispered. John cursed under his breath. "Stay here," he said, grabbing his blaster and heading for the door. "Wait." Lyra's voice stopped him. When he turned, she was on her feet, her glowing eyes intense. "You can't face them alone. They'll tear you apart." "I don't have a choice," he said. "If I don't stop them, we're both dead." Lyra hesitated, then pulled a small disc-shaped device from her belt. "Take this," she said, tossing it to him. "It'll disable their sensors for a few minutes, but it won't last long." John caught the device and nodded. Good enough. As he stepped outside, the cold night air hit him like a wave. The forest was alive with movement, shadows darting between the trees, the faint glow of the drone's lights cutting through the darkness. He gripped the blaster tightly, his finger hovering over the trigger. The first drone appeared, its sleek metallic body glinting in the moonlight. Its sensor array swiveled toward him, but before it could lock on, John activated the disc. A pulse of blue light rippled outward, and the drone's lights flickered and died. It crashed to the ground with a dull thud. "Not bad," John muttered, already moving to find the next one. He took down 2 more drones before the device's charge ran out, but the reprieve was short-lived. A sharp mechanical screech filled the air, and a larger drone emerged from the shadows. A hunter-class unit, heavily armed, and far deadlier than the smaller ones. John fired, but the blast barely scratched its armor. The drone whirred, raising its weaponized arm. He dove behind a tree just as a bolt of energy sizzled past him, scorching the ground where he had stood. "I could use some help here," he shouted toward the cabin. As if on cue, Lyra appeared in the doorway, her movements unsteady but determined. She raised her arm, and a beam of golden light shot from her wrist device, striking the drone squarely in its sensor array. The machine let out a distorted shriek before collapsing in a heap of smoking metal. John stared at her, wide-eyed. "What was that?" "Advanced tech," she said simply, lowering her arm. "You're welcome." Before he could respond, the sound of more drones approaching filled the air. Lyra turned to him, her expression grim. "We need to move. Now." John nodded, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He didn't know what he'd gotten himself into, but one thing was clear: there was no turning back. A dangerous alliance. The shadows of the dense forest were alive with tension as John and Lyra trudged through the undergrowth, the faint hum of hunter drones fading behind them. Every step felt like a gamble, each crack of a twig like a signal flare in the night. "Do you even know where we're going?" John asked, his voice a low growl as he glanced over his shoulder. Lyra's glowing eyes flickered, betraying her own exhaustion. "Away from here," she replied, clutching her injured arm. "Anywhere but here." The answer wasn't comforting, but John kept moving. His mind raced with questions, but there was no time to ask them. The hunters were relentless, and they wouldn't stop until they found their prey. Then, just as they reached a clearing, John froze. He held up a hand to stop Lyra. Something wasn't right. The air had changed, heavy, charged, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "We're not alone," he whispered. Before Lyra could respond, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was tall and cloaked in a shifting, almost liquid-like armor that reflected the faint light of the moon. The figure moved with a predatory grace, its face obscured by a sleek, black helmet. John raised his blaster. Not another step. The figure ignored him, its attention fixed on Lyra. "You're in deeper than you know, human," it said, its voice a smooth mechanical tone that sent a shiver down John's spine. Lyra tensed, stepping in front of John. "Rawl," she said, her voice cold. "I should have known you'd show up." John glanced at her, confused. "You know this guy?" "He's one of them," she said. "A rogue hunter." Rawl chuckled, the sound sharp and metallic. "Rogue? Hardly. I see the bigger picture, something your fragile human friend here can't begin to comprehend." John tightened his grip on the blaster. "You've got about 5 seconds to explain why I shouldn't shoot you." "Because," Rawl said, stepping closer, "I know what you're carrying. And I know what it can do." John's stomach sank. "What are you talking about?" "The artifact," Rawl said, his helmet tilting slightly. "You think you're just a mechanic, a nobody hiding in the middle of nowhere. But you're far more than that, John. And deep down, you know it." John glanced at Lyra, but she looked just as unsettled as he felt. "I don't know what you're trying to pull," he said, But I'm not interested. You don't have a choice, Rawl said. The hunters won't stop. They'll burn this planet to ash if it means getting to you. But I can help you. Together, we can stop them. Lyra stepped forward, her voice sharp. Why would you help us? What's in it for you? Rawl's helmet turned toward her. Let's just say I have my reasons. The faction I served is blind, obsessed with power they don't understand. The artifact is dangerous in the wrong hands, and I'd rather not see the galaxy torn apart. John frowned. And you think I can stop all that? I don't think, Rawl said. I know. You're connected to the artifact in ways even she hasn't told you yet. He gestured to Lyra. You're not just some random human who stumbled into this. You're part of something far bigger. Lyra's expression tightened. He doesn't need to know everything. Not yet. John looked between them, his frustration boiling over. You're both talking in riddles. What is this artifact? And why do you keep saying I'm connected to it? Rawl took a step closer, his voice low. Because it's not just a weapon. It's a living thing, a consciousness tied to your DNA. You're not just connected to it. You're its keeper. The words hit John like a punch to the gut. He wanted to argue, to tell Rawl he was crazy. But deep down, something about it felt true. The flicker of memory from before. The strange pull he'd felt since meeting Lyra. It all started to make a disturbing kind of sense. Before he could respond, a distant roar shattered the tension. The hunters were back, their drones slicing through the forest like sharks in the water. Rawl's armor shifted, the liquid surface hardening into jagged edges. We don't have time for this. Decide now. Fight with me, or die here. John hesitated, his mind racing. He didn't trust Rawl, but the odds weren't in their favor. Lyra looked at him, her golden eyes filled with urgency. We don't have a choice, she said. We need him. John cursed under his breath, then nodded. Fine. But if you try anything, you'll regret it. Rawl laughed, the sound cold and hollow. You've got spirit, human. Let's hope it's enough. The three of them turned to face the incoming drones, the hum of their engines growing louder. The battle ahead wasn't just about survival. It was the first step in a fight that could change the fate of the galaxy. The artifact's truth. The cave was damp and cold, its walls glistening with condensation that reflected the dim glow of Lyra's wristlight. The three of them, John, Lyra, and Rawl, had retreated here after barely escaping the hunter drones. The narrow entrance offered some security, but the oppressive silence inside made John's skin crawl. This better be worth it, John muttered, leaning against the jagged wall and glaring at Rawl. You dragged us into this death trap for a reason, I hope. Rawl's helmeted head turned toward him, the faint shimmer of his reflective visor making John feel exposed. You're standing in the reason, Rawl said, his voice calm and metallic. This isn't just a cave. It's the resting place of the artifact. John's heart skipped a beat. You're joking. Lyra stepped forward, her glowing eyes scanning the walls with a mixture of wonder and dread. He's not, she said softly. Her fingers brushed against a series of ancient carvings etched into the stone, symbols and shapes that seemed to shift under the light. This is it. John pushed off the wall, his frustration bubbling over. Okay, enough. No more cryptic nonsense. What is this artifact? What does it do? And why do you both keep acting like I'm the missing piece to some cosmic puzzle? Lyra turned to him, her expression weary but sincere. The artifact isn't just a weapon, John. It's alive, or at least part of it is. It was created by an ancient race, long before humans, or even my kind existed. They called themselves the Architects. John frowned. Architects. That sounds ominous. They were, Rawl said, stepping closer. They built wonders and horrors, tools to shape entire galaxies. But the artifact was their crowning achievement, a device that could rewrite reality itself. John's stomach churned. Rewrite reality. That sounds like the kind of thing that should stay buried. Lyra nodded. It should have. But the hunters, the faction, discovered fragments of its existence. They'd been searching for centuries, piecing together clues. And now, they've tracked it here. Why me? John asked, his voice rising. Why am I part of this? Rawl tilted his head. Because the artifact isn't just buried here. It's linked to you. That doesn't make any sense. John snapped. I'm just a guy. A mechanic. I've never even been to this planet before. Lyra stepped closer, her golden eyes filled with something John couldn't quite place. Pity, maybe, or something deeper. It's not about where you've been, John. It's about who you are. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, his voice trembling. Rawl raised a hand, and a faint hum filled the cave. The carvings on the walls began to glow, a soft, pulsating light that seemed to sync with John's heartbeat. The ground trembled slightly, and a section of the cave wall slid open, revealing the chamber beyond. Inside the chamber, a pedestal stood at the center, and resting on it was a spherical object that seemed to defy reality itself. Its surface shifted constantly, like liquid trapped in a solid form, and faint, incomprehensible whispers filled the air around it. John took a step back. What the hell is that? The artifact, Rawl said simply, or what's left of it. Lyra moved toward the pedestal, her movements slow and reverent. It's been waiting, she said, for centuries, maybe longer, waiting for its keeper. John shook his head. No. Nope. I'm not touching that thing. You don't have a choice, Rawl said. It's already bonded to you. That's why the hunters are after you. Why they'll never stop. John stared at the artifact, his chest tight. The whispers grew louder, tugging at the edges of his mind. He didn't want to believe any of this, but deep down, something stirred, a memory, maybe, or a feeling he couldn't explain. What happens if I touch it? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra turned to him, her expression both hopeful and fearful. You'll unlock its power, but that comes with a cost. John's throat tightened. What kind of cost? Before she could answer, the ground shook violently. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the faint hum of hunter drones echoed from the cave entrance. They found us, Rawl said, his voice calm but urgent. If you don't activate the artifact now, none of us are leaving this cave alive. John looked at Lyra, then at Rawl, and finally at the artifact. The whispers grew louder, almost pleading. His hand trembled as he reached out. The moment his fingers touched the surface, a surge of energy shot through him, and the world around him dissolved into light. Voices, images, and sensations flooded his mind. Too much, too fast. He saw worlds being built and destroyed, civilizations rising and falling, and through it all, a single constant, the artifact, and the endless cycle of those who sought to control it. When the light faded, John was on his knees, gasping for air. Lyra was beside him, her hand on his shoulder. John, she said softly, are you okay? He looked up at her, his eyes glowing faintly, just like hers. I don't think I'll ever be okay again. Behind them, the hum of the drones grew louder, but John didn't feel afraid anymore. He stood, his hand tightening into a fist as a faint aura of energy surrounded him. Let them come, he said, his voice steady. I'm ready. The battle for survival. The air outside the cave was electric, thick with the tension of an impending fight. The forest, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The hum of the hunter drones grew louder, reverberating through the ground like the beating of war drums. John stood at the cave's mouth, the artifact still thrumming faintly in his chest. The moment he had touched it, something inside him had shifted. He wasn't just a man anymore. He felt like something more, though he couldn't put it into words. A faint glow surrounded his hands, flickering like an untamed flame. Control it, Rawl said from behind him. The rogue hunter's visor gleamed, reflecting the soft light of the artifact. If you can't, you'll destroy yourself before they even get to you. I didn't ask for this, John snapped, His voice edged with frustration. "You dumped this mess in my lap. Now I'm supposed to be some kind of savior." "You don't have a choice," Rawl said coldly. "They're here." The first drone broke through the treetops, its sleek metallic body glinting under the faint moonlight. It let out a sharp, piercing sound, signaling the others. Within seconds, the forest came alive with movement. Dozens of drones swarmed through the trees, their red lights cutting through the darkness like blades. Lyra stepped forward, her glowing eyes narrowing. She raised her arm, and a beam of golden energy shot from her wrist device, slicing through the nearest drone. It exploded in a shower of sparks, but more took its place. "There's too many of them," she shouted, her voice strained. "We can't hold them off for long." John gritted his teeth. His instincts screamed at him to run, to find cover and wait for the chaos to pass. But something deeper, the artifact, urged him to fight. He raised his hand, and the faint glow around it intensified. He didn't know what he was doing, but it didn't matter. The energy surged from his palm, arcing through the air like a bolt of lightning. It struck one of the drones, reducing it to a heap of molten metal. The force of it sent a jolt through John's body, but he steadied himself. "Not bad," Rawl said, stepping into the fray. His liquid-like armor shifted and hardened into jagged blades, and he moved with inhuman speed, cutting through drones like a whirlwind of destruction. The three of them fought as one, a chaotic, desperate team. Lyra's precision strikes, Rawl's brutal efficiency, and John's raw, untamed power. But for every drone they destroyed, it felt like two more took its place. "This isn't working," Lyra yelled, her voice barely audible over the sound of explosions and energy blasts. "We need a plan." John's mind raced. The artifact pulsed, feeding him flashes of information, coordinates, images, possibilities. He didn't understand it, but one idea stood out, clear and insistent. "We lure them to the clearing," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "All of them." Lyra looked at him like he was insane. "Are you trying to get us killed?" "Trust me," John said, surprising even himself. "I have an idea." Without waiting for an answer, he turned and sprinted toward the clearing. The drones, drawn to the artifact's energy, followed like predators on the hunt. Lyra and Rawl exchanged a glance before reluctantly following. The clearing was wide and open, the perfect place for an ambush, or a massacre. John stopped in the center, his chest heaving as the drones closed in around them. Lyra and Rawl took positions at his sides, their weapons raised. "Now what?" Lyra demanded. "Just hold them off," John said, closing his eyes. He focused on the artifact, on the energy thrumming within him. The whispers in his mind grew louder, guiding him, shaping his thoughts into something tangible. The drones moved in, their weapons charging. Lyra and Rawl opened fire, their attacks precise but frantic. John, meanwhile, stood perfectly still, his glowing hands outstretched. The ground beneath them began to vibrate. A low hum filled the air, growing louder and deeper until it drowned out everything else. The drones hesitated, their sensors flickering as if confused. "What are you doing?" Lyra shouted, shielding her face from the sudden wind that whipped through the clearing. John didn't answer. The artifact's energy flowed through him, wild and untamed, but he didn't fight it. He channeled it, shaping it into a wave of pure force. With a final, desperate push, he released it. The explosion of energy was blinding. It swept through the clearing like a storm, tearing the drones apart and sending their shattered remains flying. Even Lyra and Rawl were knocked back, shielding themselves from the blast. When the light faded, the clearing was silent. The drones were gone, reduced to nothing but twisted metal and scorched earth. John fell to his knees, gasping for air. His hands still glowed faintly, but the energy felt quieter now. Controlled. Lyra rushed to his side, her golden eyes wide with concern. "John, are you okay?" He looked up at her, exhausted but alive. I think I'm starting to get the hang of it. Rawl approached, his armor retracting into its original form. He looked at the destruction around them and nodded, almost approvingly. Impressive, he said, but this was just the beginning. The hunters will send more. Stronger. John pushed himself to his feet, his jaw set. Let them, he said, his voice steady. I'm not running anymore. The three of them stood together in the clearing, surrounded by the wreckage of the battle. The night was quiet again, but they all knew it wouldn't last. The real fight was still ahead. Betrayals and revelations. The silence after the battle was heavier than the chaos that preceded it. The clearing was littered with the smoldering remains of drones, their twisted metal glinting under the pale moonlight. But even as John, Lyra, and Rawl caught their breath, a feeling of unease settled over the group. John glanced at Lyra, her golden eyes dim with exhaustion. Then at Rawl, whose visor reflected nothing but cold calculation. We need answers, John said, breaking the silence. No more secrets. No more half-truths. If we're going to survive this, I need to know everything. Rawl chuckled, the sound sharp and mechanical. Everything, he repeated. Are you sure you're ready for that, human? John's jaw tightened. Try me. Rawl stepped closer, his movements deliberate and almost predatory. The artifact didn't just bond with you by accident. It was made for you, or someone like you. The architects built it to be wielded by a human. The fact that you exist means their plan has been in motion for longer than any of us can comprehend. Lyra flinched at his words, her glowing eyes narrowing. That's enough, Rawl. No, John said, his voice firm. Let him finish. Rawl tilted his head, as if studying John. The truth, Keeper, is that you are a product of something ancient, something that began long before your kind even left Earth. The artifact was designed to merge with a specific genetic code. Your code. You weren't just chosen, you were engineered. The words hit John like a punch to the gut. That's insane, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. I'm just a guy. A mechanic. Lyra stepped forward, her face a mixture of guilt and resolve. He's not lying, John. I didn't want to tell you because I thought it might break you. But the artifact didn't choose you by chance. It's why the hunters are so desperate to capture you. Or kill him, Rawl added, his tone cold. John's head spun. Memories and flashes of the artifact surged in his mind. The ancient voices, the visions of creation and destruction. If I was engineered, he said slowly, then who did it? And why? Before Lyra could answer, a sharp mechanical whine cut through the air. John turned just in time to see a hunter drone streaking toward them, its energy weapon glowing with deadly intent. He raised his hand instinctively, and a surge of power erupted from his palm, obliterating the drone in midair. When the dust settled, he turned back to Lyra and Rawl. We don't have time for this, he said. If there's more coming, we need to move. But Rawl didn't move. Instead, he raised his hand, and a hidden blade extended from his armor. No, he said quietly. You need to stop. John froze, his heart pounding. What are you doing? Rawl's visor tilted, his voice almost regretful. I didn't come here to help you, Keeper. I came to ensure the artifact doesn't fall into the wrong hands. If that means eliminating you, so be it. Rawl, Lyra shouted, stepping between them. We need him. You can't. He's a liability, Rawl said, his voice hard. Do you think the hunters are the only ones who want the artifact? The galaxy is full of factions that would burn worlds to get their hands on it. If he can't control it, he'll be worse than all of them combined. John's fists clenched, the glow around them intensifying. You think killing me will solve everything. You're just like them. No, Rawl said, taking a step forward. I'm worse. Before Rawl could strike, Lyra moved. Her arm shot out, her wrist device emitting a blinding beam of light that sent Rawl stumbling back. Run, John, she shouted. But John didn't run. The energy inside him surged, fueled by anger and betrayal. "I'm done running," he said, his voice low and steady. Rawl recovered quickly, his blade shimmering with energy. "Then fight, Keeper," he said. "Show me what you're capable of." The clearing erupted into chaos once again. Rawl moved with lethal precision, his blade slicing through the air with terrifying speed. But John was faster than he had been before. The artifact's power coursed through him, guiding his movements, amplifying his strength. Lyra joined the fight, her energy blasts forcing Rawl to split his focus. "You don't have to do this, Rawl," she shouted, her voice filled with desperation. "We can stop them together." But Rawl's only response was a harsh laugh. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about stopping them. It's about stopping him." John's fury boiled over. With a roar, he unleashed a wave of energy that sent Rawl flying into the tree line. The rogue hunter crashed to the ground, his armor smoking. For a moment, there was silence. Then Rawl began to laugh, a low, hollow sound that sent chills down John's spine. "You're stronger than I expected," he said, his voice distorted. "But strength won't save you." Before John could respond, Rawl pressed a hidden panel on his armor. A signal shot into the air, a beacon that lit up the night sky like a flare. "They'll be here soon," Rawl said, his voice fading as his body shimmered and vanished into thin air. "And you won't survive them." Lyra ran to John's side, her face pale. "What do we do now?" John looked at the glowing beacon in the sky, his jaw tightening. "We fight," he said, "and this time, we finish it." The final choice. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and ozone, the forest a smoldering graveyard of destruction. The beacon Rawl had activated now hung in the night sky like an artificial star, pulsing ominously. It was a call to war, a signal that brought with it an armada of hunters. John stood at the edge of the clearing, the artifact's energy coursing through his veins. His hands glowed faintly, the power inside him crackling like a storm waiting to be unleashed. Behind him, Lyra struggled to her feet, her silvery hair matted with dirt and blood. The fight had taken its toll on both of them. "They'll be here any second," she said, her voice hoarse. "We can't take them all." John didn't turn. His eyes were locked on the sky, where the first hunter ships began to break through the atmosphere. "We don't have to," he said quietly. Lyra frowned, stepping closer. "What are you talking about?" John finally turned to face her, his expression calm but resolute. "The artifact showed me something I didn't understand until now. It's not just a weapon or a key. It's a choice." Lyra's golden eyes widened. "A choice for what?" "To reset everything," John said. His voice was steady, but there was a weight to his words, as if he were speaking the truth that had been buried for millennia. The architects designed the artifact to give its keeper the power to shape reality, to erase the threats, the wars, the pain, at a cost. Lyra stepped closer, her hands trembling. "What cost?" John looked down at his hands, the glow intensifying. "It'll take me with it. I'll become part of it, a guardian of sorts. The hunters, the factions, they'll never stop as long as it exists in this form. But if I use it to end this, they'll lose their reason to fight." "No," Lyra said, her voice shaking. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," John said. "You know that." The ground trembled as the hunter ships landed in the clearing, their massive forms casting shadows over the scorched earth. Drones poured out of their bays, their red lights scanning the area like vultures circling a dying animal. Lyra grabbed John's arm. "We'll fight them together. We've made it this far." John placed his hand over hers, his touch gentle. "This isn't your fight, Lyra. It never was." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she didn't pull away. "You saved me," she whispered. "Back then. And now. Don't make me lose you too." A low hum filled the air as the artifact's power began to swell. John stepped back, the energy around him intensifying. "You won't lose me," he said. "Not really. I'll always be here, and you'll make sure they never forget why." The first wave of drones surged forward, their weapons locking onto John. But before they could fire, he raised his hands, and a massive wave of energy erupted from the artifact. The drones disintegrated instantly, their remains scattered like ash in the wind. The hunters hesitated, their ranks faltering as the glow around John grew brighter. He turned to Lyra one last time, his voice soft but unwavering. "Go. Live. Make it mean something." Before she could protest, the artifact's energy reached its peak. The light around John became blinding, a beacon that outshone even the hunter ships. Lyra shielded her eyes as a deafening roar filled the air. When the light faded, the clearing was empty. The hunter ships had vanished, their forces wiped out in an instant. The beacon in the sky was gone, and with it John. The only thing that remained was a faint, shimmering glow where he had stood, a reminder of the choice he had made. Lyra fell to her knees, her chest heaving with silent sobs. The world around her was quiet now, the battle over, but her heart felt heavier than ever. In the distance, the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, painting the horizon in shades of gold and crimson. Lyra rose slowly, her eyes fixed on the faint glow that lingered in the clearing. "You didn't just save me," she whispered. "You saved us all." And as the light of a new day filled the sky, she turned and walked away, carrying with her the memory of a man who had given everything to change the galaxy forever.